Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the IBME UBU show, where we discuss topics such as leadership development and personal success journeys. I'm your host, Antoine Valentin, and today we're joined by a very special guest, KeKoria Greer. KeKoria Greer is currently the Global Vice Chair of Black Engagement Network at 2U, where she's been for over 6 years, and is also a fellow Pepperdine Business School alumni, which is where you and I met. KeKoria, welcome, and
Yeah,
thank you so much for joining. I'm super excited to have this conversation today.
yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Wonderful. So let's jump right in. There's tons of questions I have for you. Obviously, we met during our master's journey, and we got to interact quite a bit. And I always loved your energy that you brought, which was, I felt it even virtually as we had most of our sessions virtually. Which is not easy to do. And you definitely had it. It was infectious to everybody else, I think, that interacted with you as well. I'm really curious. Well, let's start with Pepperdine. What made you decide to go get your master's in the first place?
Thank you. Thanks for the intro, by the way. I'm gonna have to take that snippet of our interview and write down the words. So I appreciate it. And thanks for having me again. I'm so excited. But great question. And I know you and I were talking a little bit before this just about our values, why we do what we do. And I think we'll get into that in today's interview a bit more. But for Pepperdine, for me, it was the mission and it was the values that really attracted me to the university. I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama, currently living in the DC area. I spent some time as a consultant traveling quite a bit. And all of those things that rang true from my undergraduate experience, being raised by my family in Alabama to where I am now, even the company I'm at, the organization, the mission. Past a certain point, I have a deep connection between what I'm doing, the why, like you shared in our pre-interview chat, and having those things aligned. So when I was doing research, I initially thought I would be going to law school. That was my plan. That was my charted plan. I said I would move to the DC area. I would be at this company for a year. Clearly that hadn't happened. I've been here a little bit longer than a year.
Mhm.
Wasn't expecting that. And then a colleague of mine was like, have you thought about Pepperdine's business school? Because he knew by that point in our conversations what was important to me. And I was like, wait a second. The reason I wanted to go to law school is to be able to help out my community, use you know, my gift and what I feel was my communication skills and being able to connect with people and build relationships and know the law and pour back into the community for those who don't have that access. Accessibility was important to me. Then I looked at business school and I was like, wait a second, I can still do this in a way, but maybe it's the business side. Maybe it's looking at the people side. And so I looked into Pepperdine and I saw the mission and I was like, world's best leader. What is that? And then I looked up what the meaning of a world's best leader was and looking at really pouring into the person, the individual, being grounded in your values, and understanding people better so you can lead better and understanding the work they do, who they are, and how that can be attached to their work. And I was hooked. So when I applied, I was like, I hope they accept me. But ever since I would say my colleague Siraju mentioned Pepperdine to me and I did my research, from that moment I was sold. At that point, it was just, will they accept me? And where can I sign the dotted line?
Yeah, and I share a lot of the reasons why I picked Pepperdine as well with you. Definitely the values-based leadership and the mission resonated for me and my personal values. Um, what would you say looking back, or maybe the top three sort of lessons that you learned? Obviously, we learned quite a bit, but is there anything that sort of stands out to you as far as like these are the most impactful lessons that I learned through the experience?
That's such a great question. The top three things. Okay. So the first one that stands out is the people side of business. Like there is a formula when it comes to businesses do a really great job with change management. Like we know timeline wise, we can put it up on a wall and say, we're going to start this project this date. We're going to end it this date. As a result, the org chart is going to change that way. But sometimes we know the people are attached to it, but we don't lean in more on that transformation that's happening with the people that we're taking with us along our change. So as a part of our capstone, one thing that my team and I focused on was the human side of change, right? And how to pair a change management model, right, of like the changes your business needs to have to produce something with those people who are going to be attached to that. And one thing that sticks out to me that I am seeing to this day, as I've seen a number of changes over the last almost 6 years being at the company, is change is inevitable. It's going to happen. But guess who are tied to those changes? People. And we'll find with strategies, giving space, um, that people will actually deal with change in different ways depending on how we as leaders approach those changes and bringing them alongside versus pointing and saying you do this. The reality of it is you're going to have to do that thing, but how do we make people feel like we're bringing them along um the journey and the changes we have to make? So that was huge for me, learning about that, because ever since I learned about that particular change model, there was a ton of change in my company. There was a ton of change in my seat, where I went from managing one team for about a year and a half to managing 3 to 4 teams under the last 8 months, right? But there's a way that we can quickly build relationships with people, have them understand their value and that this thing has to happen. And so learning that at Pepperdine, I use it day to day, right? When I'm
Mm.
thinking about it. Not saying I'm perfect and I should know everything, but that's something I can say, like knowing that there's a human side to change, and there's actual models that are focused on the psychological safety and the things that people go through, whether we want to admit them or not, when changes are happening, and the anxiety that can happen just by you charting that alongside really well change management models like Lewin, Cotter, you name it. It's a science. It's almost like a dance that can happen, um, which I love a good dance.
Yeah.
But that has to be number one, understanding the people side of change. Use it every day. I think about it in my personal life. Like if I have something big coming up or if something's shifting in my friend group, what they're going through psychologically, family as well. The second piece is values-based leadership that you talked about. Understanding and narrowing down what my values are and why are those my values, and ensuring that the decisions I am making are a reflection of my values and vice versa. Right. Like we did multiple exercises and even had, weekend sessions where we had to sit there, narrow down our values, speak to them, and then reflect and think deeply. And I would say probably my third one is the power of reflection. I think sometimes in life we can be in a rush. And I remember, you probably remember this too, one of our courses that was paired with the capstone, we had to keep a journal. This was
Mhm.
at the end of the program and at the beginning of the program. And it was a hard copy journal. And I'm like, I am not a journaler. I am not that girl. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this journal? But it was a part of my grade, right? Me reflecting on things and the questions they would ask. It wasn't just business-based questions, but it was also questions about how would you approach this? Or what's something that happened this week that caused pause? And what I found the business side and the person merging together when we talk about values leadership. Reflecting again, I'm looking back and I'm like, they are so good for making us do that,
Yeah.
right? Because I think sometimes, let me say, I think work-life balance is important, but the idea that the person, the moment they leave home and go to work, whether that's remote work or in office work, that they're going to leave a piece of themselves behind, it's not going to happen.
Mm.
Integrity can be a top strength to you, and somebody can drop their wallet and you could be at the office. You're not going to not pick up the wallet and say, hey, you dropped your wallet because you're at work, you know? So, learning about that and like checking myself and holding myself accountable with how I'm showing up as a leader and the decisions I'm making, what I'm staying for, even how I speak to people and treat people. Does this align? And constantly having to reflect on that was a major takeaway. So I reflect more now today than I ever have. Ever as a result of going through those exercises. But I would say those are my top three.
There's some great learnings, and it's been over a year now, a little over a year since we walked. Talking about how you've been able to apply some of what you learned through your journey and at Pepperdine and the impact it's had on your career.
Yeah, yeah. Ah, great question. When I started at Pepperdine, I went from being a senior advisor, so individual contributor, where I went from working directly with students to managing a team who works with students. So one would say the customer in a sense. I would best describe it as customer success in a sense of the role that I work in. And so going from being on the front line to being on the 1.5 line is what I call it. So you're still close to the product, but you're not the one that's coaching on the phone and supporting the actual product, right? I was at Pepperdine when I interviewed for the role to be a people manager. And it was a mixture between what I was learning in the program and great mentorship and sponsors within the company that pushed me to say, like, you should go for this thing because you can do it. I think sometimes this word that we hear called imposter syndrome pops up and goes like, why should I do it? And the reality is, why not? And so that's what actually launched, I think, my people leadership in the sense of a role. I had other positions at that time where we'll talk about this here in a minute, where I was um, on the leadership team for our Black Engagement Network, which is an employee resource network at the company. People call them ERGs, employee resource groups. We refer to them as business resource networks. Um, where Black identifying members as well as allies can get together and basically create programming resources for these different groups. And at that time, that was probably about a year and a half after George Floyd. We're hearing about these things a little bit more. And so I had leadership roles in the sense of I was a part of a leadership team. But when I started the program, I would say about 3 months after I started the program, that's when the opportunity was presented to me to actually be in a leadership role on paper. I think it gave me the confidence, and it also showed me the importance of having a board, I would call them. You call them your professional board or your personal board. And what I mean by that is a diverse group of people. I would say my board is about 5 people, could be in your organization, outside of your organization. I think a mix is nice, who know you well and they invest in you. And this is a mixture of people who mentor you actively. And this is also people who sponsor you, which means the people who, when you're not in the room, they're speaking on behalf of you and they're bringing up your name because they know your brand and they trust you. So I would say starting the program and learning what I was learning and understanding the power of mentorship and realizing like, oh, I could do this thing, I think is what launched me and really gave me the confidence where it was like, if not me, then who? Like, like I can do this. So
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think it's a great um, value in believing in yourself first and foremost,
yeah.
and speaking up for yourself, because we know a lot of times there's many reasons why or challenges why someone may not get the promotion, and part of it is just advocating for yourself, making
100%.
sure that everyone knows of your contribution. So talk to me a little bit about that career journey, because again, you've been at 2U a little over 6 years. Again, you started
Yeah.
as a student success advisor, then you progressed through various roles. Now, again, currently making it to global vice chair. So
Yeah.
I know you talked about some of the advocates and mentors, but talk to me about how was that journey? So for some people, it can be quite challenging to even get one promotion. Were you able to position yourself for success in the way that you have at 2U?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Um, the first thing I'll say is don't forget that you have secret sauce. And what I mean by that is we all have things that we naturally do and naturally gravitate to. That's what I would define as being authentic. So when I came into the company, I was scared like most, right? But naturally, I love interacting with others. So I'm relationships, I think, are in my top three, right? Like I think like if I had to define like one of my top three skill sets, it would be building, managing, and maintaining relationships. That's something that I just enjoy doing naturally. So coming into the company and not losing sight of that, right? Like naturally, I would gravitate to ask someone, no matter what their title may be. You could be the CEO, it that just really wasn't a thing for me. And so I leaned into that a little bit more. I started to ask questions. And I also took a moment to take state of who's around me, right? Like, so I would say to someone like, before you know where you're headed, you got to stop for a second and think about like, where do you want to go? And so we talked about mentorship a little bit earlier, but you do need either if that's one person or two people to pour into you in a way, because what will happen is a lot of times the roadmap you don't have to create. You just got to finesse the roadmap and feel like it and understand, am I going to take this highway or am I going to take a back road? You don't have to create it by yourself, right? So coming in, building relationships, I started to build relationships and I started to think, man, this is someone's brain that I want to pick more. Like one thing they would always say in my organization, I appreciate, like, put time on my calendar. You always hear that. And I'm here to tell you, when someone tells you that, do it. Because you know how many people actually do it? You'll be surprised. Not that many people will put the time on the calendar. And then you just show up authentically as yourself. I would say prep, have about 3 questions that you're naturally curious about. As a part of the program, one of my first assignments was to interview someone that I would once want their job one day. And I picked at our time our chief engagement officer, who was the sharpest dressed man ever. He spoke so well, but he was chief engagement officer, had a law background, and just had a way with people, right? To give you an idea, HR rolled into him, events rolled into him, and he could speak on when events like we talked about George Floyd happened. He could be the one at the executive table say like, this is why we need to have employee resource networks. This is why we need to make, he was that guy that was truly like engaging with the workforce. I interviewed him and I said, how did you get to where you are? Like I know a lot of work has been here, and he started to chart his path for me. So I think the first thing is like, know where you want to go. Like that may be like a big picture idea for me. He's gone on it now. He started his own firm. His name's David Suffin, by the way. If you want to look him up. But he took the time to meet with me. I sent him a note. He was like, absolutely, Keeks. His executive assistant set up time for us during the workday. Me and him had a solid 30 minutes. I had my questions back and forth. And I'm just getting nuggets from him. And what he shared with me is don't be afraid to ask the question. Or don't be afraid to ask the person like, hey, you want to grab coffee? I would love to pick your brain. That's a buzzword. How did you get to where you are? And when I was asking him these questions, he was like, relationships do matter. There are things you naturally gravitate towards. Don't shy away from that because you'll find yourself shining brighter in some of those areas versus you trying to um, lean into something that you're naturally just, it's not your thing. Now, I'm not saying we don't have to learn skills that we don't love. I'm not saying that, but that's why a well-diverse team is important, right? I don't have to be the numbers person, but somebody on my team probably needs to be really good at it, right?
Mhm.
And so what I would say, like in building my career, I found earlier on that who I was surrounding myself with in the sense of like sponsors and mentors was important. Another thing was I wasn't afraid to raise my hand. If we had a Q&A with the CEO, I had a question, let me just ask. And at those times, there's a famous quote that says, if it doesn't scare you, you're not growing, right? And so even for me, it was scary to ask that question, but guess what? That's a moment, right? After we were in the lunch line, they're like, thanks for asking that question. Who are you? Blah, 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 blah. It's small interactions, I think, when it comes to growing in any space that I think we underestimate and relationship building and taking that leap. I think sometimes is underestimated. At the end of the day, we're all human. No matter what your salary is, no matter where you live, we all have to eat. We all have to have water. This is natural things, right? That I think sometimes when you get overwhelmed, just simplify it and just think he's also a human just like me. I wonder if he grabbed coffee with me. He may say no, but what do you have to lose?
Right.
All you have to lose is going home and wishing that you were to ask. So it started there for me. And then just working hard and leaning in, right? Like once I found out, like, oh, so he's telling me if I do good work, and I pour into my brand this way, it should start to come. And don't be afraid, to your point. You brought up a really good point about advocating. And I think this is why it's good to have one or two mentors around you so they can pour into you to let you know, like, say the thing and not just say the thing, but say it in the spaces,
Mhm.
right? Like, this is not the time. Like, I've had mentors where I've had moments where I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. If anything, it's so much change going on. I just want to go back into the background and just kind of, and they're like, no, I actually challenge you to do the opposite thing. This is the time where I need you to be a little bit more vocal than you have been. This is the time where I need you to be a little bit more seen than you have been. Because what's it showing? It's showing resilience. It was things that were happening, but I had voices around me inside of the organization, outside of the organization, that were pouring stuff into me because they had already been on the path, right? So working hard and getting promoted from every level of an advisor within my first couple years. And then the Black Engagement Network popped up. So how this works is we all have what we call day jobs. So I am a student success manager and I manage a team. And I work with different university stakeholders, right? And my team works directly with students, supporting them to graduate, whether that's coaching, ensuring that they're in the appropriate systems and what have you. So I went from doing that job to managing a team and then transitioning and working with a lot of different stakeholders as a result of the role. But what I will tell you is how it works is that's my day job. And then the business resource networks that I mentioned with BNet, that's my secondary job. So I'm still a people manager, but BNet is voluntary in a sense of, right? So I first started helping with planning Black History Month back in 2022. And then from there, I mean, this organization is very diverse in the sense of you could have a GM in the network, you could have an advisor in the network, and they're all in different parts of the business. And that's what makes it beautiful. And so just getting in there and getting around people. When they asked me to help with Black History Month, I was like, where do I start? Because it's one of those ones where you get recruited to do it. It's not like it's just like you sign up on a sheet, but you kind of watch people and you see their work ethic. That's why I said earlier, relationship building is important and the work that you do is important as well because people are always watching, believe it or not. And don't think you're a low person on the totem pole just because of your role. You'd be surprised. Like influence is a real thing. I think we'll talk about here in a little bit. But they invited me. I did good work during the first year. Then they asked me to join the actual leadership committee. And so I had an official role there. And I'll never forget when I became vice chair, the global chair at the time was transitioning out of the company. And they put time on my calendar, and it was the vice chair and the global chair putting time on my calendar. I'm like, oh, they're just checking in with me. And they were asking me if I wanted to be vice chair. I'll never forget Shatay and Delilah. Phenomenal women, phenomenal Black women who one is not at the company anymore, one is still. You're talking about levels higher than mine, right? And they want me to go into this role. One is a vice president, general manager, right? And like we're in this Zoom room and they're like, okay, so you should be vice chair. And I'm like, me? Huh? Because I'm looking at who's been in this role before me, like how me? Imposter syndrome again, it's not a thing, but it can be a thing. People are watching. That's why I said authenticity is important and leaning into that thing that naturally comes to you. They asked me to be vice chair. I took a week because I reflected. I'm really big on like, although I'm outgoing and things of that nature, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm all in. So I didn't want to haphazardly say yes to something. After I thought about it, I prayed about it. Um, and I said yes. And it was probably one of the best decisions that I made because thereafter it was a lot of transitions that I told you about within the company, within my role, me managing a lot of different teams. That leadership team and that network was the steady part of it, and a lot of mentors, even to this day, Tricette Wright, Carlo Young, those are a few. They had shifted as well within the company. So I'm looking around like, where's my board? Where is it going? And realizing that because of this network, they may have transitioned out of the organization, but I still have those relationships that are coming forward. Um, and now this is new as of 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to announce this on LinkedIn. I'll probably, when you drop this, I'll probably drop my announcement and call people to watch this video. I've now been asked to be the global chair of BNet, which is a huge blessing. Like, the global chair will now be our executive sponsor. And so I get to work with her in this capacity alongside a vice chair, Dr. Silinda, and I'm really excited. But as I reflect and I look back, I'm like, I came to this company, I knew no one. I knew one person that told me to apply for the role. And it's been a blessing just to see where I gravitate to, keeping it simple, figuring out where I wanted to go, and just start. Something you and I talked about earlier is, and I heard this from Millette Granville, who's our VP of D&I here. She said, small hinges swing open big doors. So you may not see it today, or like you and I were talking about, you may not realize that one thing you said to someone swung open a door. But what happens with hinges is you screw about 3 screws on them, and then whoosh, before you know it, it starts happening. So I would just share with anyone, that was kind of a long answer to a short question. Just start somewhere. And one of my previous managers told me, she was like, let's pick something you want to do and let's work on it for 6 months. And you'd be surprised what doors, what
Mhm.
hinges, what screws I may be screwing into the hinges and what may fly open. She was right with that.
Yeah, I got to say, I thank you for sharing that with me. I had never heard that expression before. Small hinges open, swing open large doors. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Before I get it, though, it makes perfect sense, and hope you don't mind. I plan on using it at some point
yeah,
in
yeah,
the future.
absolutely.
Um, I understand that in addition to being accomplished professionally, you also have a side hustle, maybe a hobby that is also something you do for fun. Uh, who is DJ Keeks and what is Keeks Beats?
Yeah, DJ Keek. So that's also me. So I'm also a DJ. Keeksbeats.com if you want to check it out. I appreciate the alley oop, as we would call it, for me to dunk if you're a basketball fan. Um, so started DJing my sophomore year. So what a sophomore year of undergrad. So what a lot of people don't know is, growing up, my parents enrolled me in piano lessons at 6 years old. Then I went on to play the alto sax, euphonium, was really into symphonic music, was in the symphonic band. And then I go to college, and I was involved, and we started to hire a DJ. And I knew I had this musical touch to myself. And I'm like, and this is my business mind. In the back of my mind, I'm like, they could just pay me to do it. But as that DJ would come, we would hire him, our organization, for every event that we had on campus. I would just go to him. I was his handler in a sense. If he needed water, I would get him water. He needed a plate of food, he needed to set up his stuff. And as I was doing that, I was learning. So he kind of became my DJ mentor throughout college. The next year, I finally saved up my Christmas money and bought my equipment. And so I've been DJing now since 2013. And I'll tell you something really fascinating. So when the pandemic hit, my company has a community steering committee, which every year they pick a nonprofit organization. We raise funds and awareness for that organization. Well, we were in the pandemic and everything was virtual. So they were hosting an event for United Way's COVID-19 relief. And one of my old teammates, a lot of people didn't know I was a DJ at the company at the time. one of my old teammates knew, because as you're getting to know people, you do a get to know. And that was one of my two truths and a lie, in a sense. I'm a DJ, right? And she was on the community steering committee. And she was like, what if we had a DJ do a virtual set? And every one person that came into the event, we donated $5 to United Way, to help raise awareness and what have you. Then she hits me up. I had never done a virtual set to this point, but I'm like, I'll figure it out. She gave me like a 2 days notice once it got approved through comms and everything. And I thought, a couple people would just come and they'll hop off the call just to like, get their $5 donated. When I tell you, 5 people turned into 10, 10 turned into 50 to 100, 300, 600. The number just kept growing. And it was only a 30-minute set. But what I noticed was people stayed for that. So I did a virtual set on Zoom for the company, and it's so wild that the two merged. But I never thought DJ Keeks would find her way into this organizational space, and then my company started to hire me to do so many DJ sets a month for the company just because we were all in quarantine. It was a way where they can pop on for 15 minutes. I do a little set, and you get back to your work or you answer emails in the background. It was nice for me because it was like yoga for me. I can hop on my set real quick. I'm at home, do a quick set and what have you. And what I loved about it, and one of the reasons I started to DJ, similar to what you said on our call, it was the people side. What I love about being a DJ is it brings people together and it unifies people that probably would never say anything to one another. But in a moment, you're dancing to the same song or you're singing lyrics to a song that you didn't even know that other person knew. And so I'm a conductor in the sense of these vibes where people deal with so much that we would never know, and if I can create a space where they can come in, take a load off, and experience some joy, that's what I hope to do. That's what I hope to leave the legacy. So it was such a blessing for DJ Keeks to find KeKoria Greer and show up in the workspace. So now, like, if you're around, people would call me Keeks here, which is wild because Keeks was always separate of this place. But what I was sharing with you earlier about like who we are as people, I think work-life balance is important always. But the idea that we stop being who we are and we let our values to the side when we go into work, that's not a thing. And we shouldn't think of those things as separate. So that meant a lot to me. And now, as a result, I've started streaming online. I do sets every Monday night. We can drop the info in the description, and we've been able to grow a community. I'm really excited. We hit 20,000 followers a couple weeks ago. And that's a blessing because when I was in grad school, when we were at Pepperdine together, I would go online and watch these DJs stream, and I thought they were the coolest. I'm like, they are so cool. When I get done with school, I'm going to start streaming. And you got to have 1,000 followers to start. That was the hardest thing to do, but I stayed consistent, even when it was 3 people coming to see me play. And then it just started to take off, and it created joy and a community for folks. So that's who DJ Keeks is. That's Keeks Beats, which you can check it out, keeksbeats.com. And that's what we stand for. So, I'm really big on the entirety of the brand, in a sense, as a part of
Yeah.
DJing. I have this philanthropic arm called Keep Being, and Keeks Cares. So Keeks Cares is where we partner with so many nonprofits a year. And what I do is I use my DJ services and my platform to basically shine a light on what those nonprofits are doing in the community. So that could be me donating my time and my services, as well as donating funds for what they're doing. So it was important that I infuse that. And then Keep Being is all about, being authentic, and empowering you to be your individual self. Like, you were created for a reason, so keep being. So that's DJ Keeks and Keeks Beats.
That's so fantastic. I love it. And I've really enjoyed hearing your story today and learning more about you. My face hurts because I've been smiling the whole time. Everything you said really resonated for me. And like I said at the beginning of the call, your energy is infectious, and you've definitely put a smile on my face. And I'm fairly certain everyone who tunes in and listens to your your guidance and your wisdom is going to walk away from it feeling as inspired as I know that I am. So I want to thank you for taking time out to share your story with me. Um, uh, I'll certainly get all the right links and insert them in in the
Yeah.
in the video so people can get a hold of you. But KeKoria, thank you. It's been a blast. And,
Thank
I'm
you.
looking
And
forward to seeing what you do next. Yeah, go ahead.
let me tell you, I just want to say thank you for creating this platform. You know, the small hinges swing open big doors. I've watched a few of the interviews that you've done with previous classmates and what have you, and it's impactful. So thanks for doing this work. I know it's very values-based work that drives this for you. So thanks for having me, and thanks for what you pour into this space. It really matters.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's definitely a win-win.
Of course.